Hello and welcome to this podcast about Phytophthora root rot in plants. Phytophthora is a waterborne disease that is common in a large variety of plant material. Understanding the unique history and devastating impacts of the pathogen is very important to horticulture and landscaping professionals. It really is the fungus that broke the mold. In this podcast, we will discuss the historical perspective, agricultural impact, life cycle, and favorable conditions of Phytophthora. So let's get started. First, we will look at the historical perspective of the disease. Phytophthora has long been associated with death, not only with plants, but also with humans. The effects of one species of Phytophthora, which is devastating to potato plants, was one of the factors that caused over 1 million people to starve in the Great Irish Famine of 1845 to 57. The first instances of potato Phytophthora infestans was actually recorded in New York and Philadelphia in early 1843. Wind then spread the spores of the disease from Illinois to Nova Scotia and from Virginia to Ontario. It is suspected to have crossed the Atlantic with a shipment of seed potatoes for Belgian farmers in 1845. Virtually all the European countries were affected, but the potato blight was the worst in Ireland. The disproportionate dependency on a single species of potato, the Irish lumber, created a lack of genetic variables and an extremely susceptible host. Later, Phytophthora infestans again devastated crops in World War I era of Germany. Since ammunition depots and wiring for electrical purposes took most of the country's copper supply, little copper sulfate was available to deter the potato blight to again devastating crops. Over 700,000 people starved because of the scarcity of potatoes. Now let's look at the agricultural impact of Phytophthora today. The Latin word Phytophthora means plant destroyer. There are many species of the soil-borne pathogen in the genus Phytophthora that causes root rot diseases of herbaceous and woody plants. This includes many greenhouse production plants, almost all fruit and nut trees, many vegetable crops, especially potatoes and soybeans, and most nursery-grown ornamental trees and shrubs. Plants in the family of Ericaceous, such as rhododendrons and azaleas, are particularly vulnerable to infection. Phytophthora can develop if the soil around the base of the plant remains wet for prolonged periods. Phytophthora spores can be found in most soils and substrates and have the potential to be devastating to plant root tissue. So, how does the Phytophthora life cycle work? Phytophthora is the genus of pathogens that cause root rot in plants. They are soil-inhabiting pathogens that were once thought of as fungi, but are today considered to be a separate classification called oomycetes. To begin the explanation of their life cycle, as demonstrated by this illustration of the species Phytophthora capsicii, let's begin with oospores. These are called resting spores and can survive years in moist soil with the absence of a suitable host. However, if the soil becomes dry, these spores are less likely to survive a few months. When a suitable host is nearby, resting spores can germinate to produce millions of asexual sporangi, which in turn produce swimming zoospores that travel through the water film to infect other roots of plants nearby. See the top center picture of zoospores and the tail which propels the spore forward to a susceptible host root. The spores can remain in dead plant material for a great length of time, and if both mating types of the pathogen become available, oospores are produced to begin the cycle again. Here are illustrations to further explain how zoospores affect healthy root tissue. The spores create a cyst on the outer edge of the root cells, which are penetrated by offshoots called hyphae. The intercellular infections render plant cells unfunctional and interrupt the uptake of nutrients for plant health. The result of the feeding hyphae is the blooming and release of sporangi, producing more zoospores to infect other roots. The parasitic Phytophthora infections kill plant cells profusely and actually feed on the plant's living tissue until the entire plant dies. Well, then what are the favorable conditions of Phytophthora growth? Plants are most vulnerable in wet, soggy soils. These are ideal conditions for Phytophthora zoospores to move about to infect plants' roots and crown tissue. Phytophthora has been detected in virtually all soil media. Therefore, attention to drainage in the planting area is critical to guard against spore infection. In summary, we have discussed how Phytophthora has had an adverse historical impact on humanity in the great potato famines of the past. We established that Phytophthora is a soil-inhabiting pathogen which depends on excess water to move and infect plant roots. Catastrophic wilting, coupled with poor drainage of soil, are principal symptoms of Phytophthora, and by managing the drainage of plant material, Phytophthora may be prevented before it begins in the first place. Well, we have come to the end of this podcast on Phytophthora disease. Here I have included references of the material presented, and I have provided photograph credits as well. I hope that you have enjoyed this podcast on the Phytophthora oomycete and that the information was useful, practical, and may help in your studies of plant nutrition. Continue the study of this fascinating pathogen with the next posting of the lesson.